All of a sudden, my supervisor called out, "Chinese mafia at work."
The cold wind of social meanness has been blowing across Canada for the last 10 years.
I went to my boss and said, "This is not fair. This is not fair." You know what he told me? He said, "Ranjit, I'll swear by the Bible and said, I'll never said this to you. If we go to court any day, I'll swear by the Bible and say I didn't say this to you. But don't expect to be treated like a white Canadian."
The participation rate in the federal public service for visible minorities is 4.7%, compared to a labor force availability of 9%.
Serious initiatives from top public servants and politicians must be taken to redress the problems of employment inequity.
We continue to be disappointed that conferences such as this are still necessary so late in the 20th century.
We are a support group, and we want all racially visible people within the federal public service to feel they can approach us to be able to share their concerns and issues.
I'm very happy when I see the diversity of people, the different colors and the gender. We're all here. Now we're going to talk about our Canadian problem.
I had the attitudes were comments amongst the teenagers, certainly in the community that I grew up in. It was an almost exclusively white community, and it was not uncommon for racist comments and racist jokes to be bandied about, and I participated.
The racism and ghettoism exclude minorities from the mainstream of Canadian society. This exclusion is real. It is not an illusion.
We need to understand racism in at least two general ways. And that is that racism is many times an overt and ugly thing in our society. Racism on the internet, racist violence, racist slurs. And unfortunately, most of society confines racism to that box, and that's how they understand it. I think the much deeper challenge is to understand subtle racism, to understand how it works in very, very subtle ways, and to try to find a way to recognize that that racism is just as ugly and that it's not confined to a narrow box and a small number of people that we call bigots and racists, that it's very much alive and well among all of us.
We have all types of policies and practices, and we try to believe in those policies and practices and say, hey, we have all this. We are not discriminating. But the point is, those policies and practices is a camouflage. If they are not implemented, if they are not carried out, if there are no results brought out as a result of those policies and practices, racism prevails. And racism prevails in a camouflage form.
Essentially, the system tells you something. But in the case of the networking, basically, we are excluded from the networking because nobody wants us. But they tell you, oh, network, keep on networking, it may happen, you know.
A man is brought who's introduced to us as the new director in the bureau where I work. And this is the Bureau of Veterinary Drugs. The man has no qualifications in drugs or veterinary medicine. When he sees us, there's about 60% of the professionals who are visible minority. We're actually the majority. And he says, I like visible minorities. These people behave like this. They have no sensitivity. He assumes he's going to be our director for the next 10 years, and where we have been there for 30 years. And we have never had a chance to even apply for a job like that.
I joined CEDA at the PM5 level, and I remained, and today, 23 years after, I'm still at PM5 level.
One got caught for having said that visible minorities are all right for technical slavery, intellectual work, but they're not good for management because they come from societies which are not taught to work in the North American way of conducting business.
In the 17 or 18 years that I was with CEDA, I was never promoted. I came in as a PM5 and I left as a PM5.
I asked my boss to take a couple of days because my wife was in the hospital and the baby was at home. My boss refused. I knew I had a right to take sick leave or family leave, but my boss refused, saying that there was too much work. The position I was occupying was not an emergency position. Nobody was dying or would die if I was not in the office, but he refused, just to show me his authority.
Most racial discrimination are subtle. It started with simple messages, eye movement, and body languages. And if the actions are not discouraged, it will end up with actual verbal abuse or abuse in writing. And eventually, with the slightest excuse or false allegation, the victim will be fired. I experienced all this in the last 10 years. My supervisor kept denying me of project work which I was hired for. I was given assignments like filling in for the work of people who are sick, doing odd jobs in the division, and preparing monthly report for other people. On top of that, I was being called Madam Butterfly and Geisha Girl. My supervisor asked me to help his wife to set up a book of account for her business. I was told to go to his home. I have to oblige. Honestly, it wasn't willingly. As I arrived at his house, I realized it wasn't to set up a book. I have been trapped to a much bigger accounting work. The real job was to reconstruct a 5-year house renovation business accounting. The accounting was for a court defense. The record available, to say the least, were inaccurate. My refusal to sign the financial statement offended my supervisor because he told me the certificate had to be certified because it is going to court. The meeting obviously did not end up on a happy note.
The officer asked me to go to bed with him. In turn, he will help me to get a promotion. I refused. I let him know that I was insulted by the offer. We returned to the office, and the insults and the humiliations against me started. Every time I went to see him regarding my assignment, I was insulted and told that I was very stupid, that my work was inadequate, and that I did not belong in the unit. When I informed the director of the division of the advances made to me by the officer, his response was, I should take this as a compliment, not as an insult. As time went by, I attempted to pretend that I did not have a problem. I denied the fact that I was being harassed. I feared management reprisal, a bad performance appraisal, and a loss of my job. So I tried to ignore the person and what was said to me. I was told that I should go to bed with the officer because all Latin American women are hot. At our office Christmas party, the director requested that the officer and I should patch up our differences and become friends. Instead, in front of the entire staff, the officer angrily demanded of the director that I be fired, shouted that I was nothing but a stupid Indian from Peru, and that I was not a real Canadian and deserved what I got. I left the table in tears. I was physically sick, throwing up. The harasser, with no restraint from management, and in some cases with encouragement, threatened me verbally and physically, pushing his fist in my face, pounding the walls of my office. We received threats and unseen phone calls at home. I lost most of my friends. No one person in SIDA wanted to be seen with me or came near me because they were feared for their work, for their careers.
I was subject to reprimands on fabricated cases.
And I was also subject to false police investigation. The department makes false report to the Ottawa police.
Management tried to demonstrate that I was mentally disturbed and tried to fabricate a case against me on that basis.
Anger against the racism is a justified emotion.
Employment equity practice has a great deal of this notion that we have to be nice or it won't work. Now, I agree absolutely that the best form of change is positive change, that you need to change a culture in a way that everyone feels good about it. But again, there is a barrier there that allows the feel-good policy to come ahead of effective employment equity implementation.
I wrote to the President of the Treasury Board and to the Prime Minister's office, drawing their attention to this report. And I got a very prompt response from the President of the Treasury Board, who said that this has got priority, and they are going to do certain things. Now, maybe you have heard about what they have done. I haven't heard anything so far.
The commission structure, which was created to address the human rights problem in 70s, may be inadequate and not flexible enough to address the race issues of 90s and beyond. And that is the problem. There may be a resigned acceptance that human rights commissions do very little to help minorities. There is a cursory investigation, and then they accept readily the response from the respondent. All this led to disconnection between the human rights commissions and minority communities, with the gap being filled with cynicism, apathy, and disinterest.
Referring to your complaint with regard to instances when I have referred to you as Madam Butterfly, Geisha Girl, Chinese Mafia, they were uttered in what I thought to be an endearing and good humor context. I regret deeply that you have found this remark to be offensive. I would like to ask any of you sitting here find that a sincere apology. I find that it's adding insult to injury. However, because of that letter, the commission investigation concluded that no further proceedings are warranted because the situation has been redressed in that the respondent has provided you with a letter of apology. 10 days later, I was laid off. The reason given for my layoff was the administrative renewal division disbanded and my job there affected. And I give you a fruit for thought. I was not in that division.
What happens to the people who discriminate? Get promoted. This is something like what happened in South Africa when a white policeman hit a black person, he gets promoted.
The government itself is contemptuous because now they have gone back to even amend the Human Rights Act, as you saw, heard this morning, that no longer would a tribunal be able to award the same remedies as were awarded in the NCAR case.
A union has a role to monitor what employers are required to do. Along with that, a union must bring practices that perpetuate systemic discrimination to the light of day. When employers are not complying with their obligations, they must be taken to task for it.
Collective bargaining has a major role to play in eliminating barriers. Through collective bargaining, we can achieve changes in the workplace and the terms and conditions of employment.
When the global case was fought, it was estimated that it cost the public close to $1 million. In fighting the NCAR case, it's our estimate that it would have cost the public approximately $2 million. This is a horrendous amount of money because it's spent, all of it, or most of it, by the Department of Justice, who have lawyers who have nothing else to do but to prolong the cases, because that confirms their jobs.
Perhaps the next step is a meeting similar to this one, where managers are in the room, where the senior people within the departments are listening to what the problems are, where they can identify within their own departments barriers to a workplace which treats people with respect.
If senior public servants, senior public officials of any sort know that they can be held accountable, that they can be sued because they are not providing public servants or members of the public with the equal benefit and equal protection of the laws in the application and or administration of those laws because of a prohibited ground, on the basis of a prohibited ground of discrimination, they are accountable. And as Dr. Pereira said yesterday, hopefully that'll sink in. We won't have to file as many of these complaints or these actions or these claims.
If we ourselves accept we are unequal, if we ourselves, to get a promotion, we tally up with the boss, even though we are not qualified until that, and work with it, collaborate with it. And if we ourselves do not want to challenge discrimination, we accept discrimination. We are responsible. We ourselves are responsible.
I, my husband, and the support of the union representative in SIDA defeated SIDA. I did it without any legal counsel, without the support of the PSAC as an institution, without the hand-wringing sympathy of women or minority organizations, and in spite of all, to frequent and ineffectiveness and downright spinelessness of the Canadian Human Rights Commission, which was reluctant to draw blood, SIDA and its managers lost, and I won.
Any of you who are going to start a campaign, talk to someone who lived through it. It was not an easy process. It is constant depression. However, the brighter side of it is I like myself. I come out of at the end now.
Yeah.
The only way that my children and my children's children wouldn't go through the same process is to ask the cause to explain to me what it is to be a Canadian, what it is to be considered as a human being, what it is that I will be able to leave to my children. That is why we are here, and that is why we will continue. And I thank you very much, all of you, for coming. Thank you.